And look, the mic is on. So welcome. I don't know about, I don't think I can even say that word, but thank you, Robin, for the nice introduction. If you're in this room to hear from buyers, you're in the right place. So we are going to talk about a variety of things, but we're going to really focus in on buyers' coalitions, buyers' initiatives, initiatives for carbon markets, et cetera. I mean, that's really the focus, is the coalition approach. Before we get started, I think that the best thing to do is to introduce our speakers. And of course, you're not in the right order, but that's okay. We'll start with Carl. Carl Kish, he is the Senior Policy Lead at the Beyond Coalition. And then we have Catherine Kuhn. She's the Global Sustainability Advocacy Program Manager for Carbon Removals at Google. And then we have Clare Sierawski. I'm sure I wasn't going to get it. Clare is the Managing Director for the Kinetic Coalition at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES. So we have a great panel, and I think we're going to have a really good discussion. And that's the goal for this, is to really have a discussion. I'm going to ask some questions, and I would welcome you to ask each other questions. All right? If you haven't noticed the proliferation of buyers' clubs, coalitions on carbon markets, I think you haven't been paying attention, to be frank, because they are popping up everywhere. Just off the top of my head, I mean, of course, we have Beyond. We have Kinetic. Google, you're part of several. We have Frontier, Symbiosis. There was an announcement just a few weeks ago about the Super Pollutant Action Initiative, and I think you'll talk about that a little bit, Catherine. Just 2 weeks ago, we had the Carbon Direct Removal, CDR, initiative announced in Canada. And even the EU government is trying to form a buyers club for credits that have come out of the Carbon Removal Carbon Farming Initiative, CRCF. So, you know, I've been in this market quite a while, and you have to say, well, what's really motivating this proliferation of initiatives? I mean, always, you know, companies have liked to work together on different things. But on carbon markets, this is kind of a new thing. You haven't really seen that. This is really just starting. I mean, I think Beyond might have been first. It seemed like it was one of the first ones. But why are buyers joining these? What's the purpose? I mean, I have my own theories. I, at one point, was at C2S, and I ran our business council. And the companies like to work together on things, which is important. But not on carbon. There was a lot of competition on carbon. So why carbon? You know, I think that maybe it's in part because you've probably heard about climate hushing, right? And so working together in a group, maybe that helps relieve some of the fear of being targeted, because there are strength in numbers, right? Maybe there is a value in aggregating demand, because I think there's a lot of companies really committed to taking action. They're not walking away from these net zero goals. They are not walking away from their commitments, but maybe they're not being quite as loud. So being part of a coalition, maybe that provides some anonymity, except if you ever go to any of these coalition websites, you will find their names. So it's not really anonymous. So what other explanations could there be? Well, I mean, in addition to aggregating demand, it could be de-risking, maybe learning from each other on different issues. Maybe it's in part to help with the reputational risk, again, you know, strength in numbers thing. So I think there's a variety of issues and maybe there's a variety of issues for belonging to different coalitions. So we're going to dive into some of those issues, and you know, I think it's an interesting idea, and we haven't seen the last of them. That's my humble prediction. I think there'll be more. So why don't we start out with each of you explaining about the coalitions that you have worked with or are working with, and maybe why you're working with those coalitions. So let's just start with that opening one, okay? Carl, why don't you go first?
Sure. So the Beyond Alliance includes corporates and NGOs that are really focused on strengthening the policy, standards, and market infrastructure that enables corporates to invest in climate solutions with confidence. And we do sometimes, coordinate collective action like the Super Pollutant Action Initiative that we launched recently with a few different leading corporates, and Catherine and I can talk more about that later. But in general, Beyond is focused on advocating for all solutions. There are other coalitions that are very focused on doing advanced market commitments for specific pathways, and they do a great job at that, and we partner with them on those different initiatives, and I can speak to that a little bit later. But going back to the beginnings of Beyond, we were actually called the Business Alliance to Scale Climate Solutions back in 2020, and this is when companies were realizing that we could move a lot faster together rather than in silos. And so building on that momentum, we then rebranded as the Beyond Alliance and folded under the We Mean Business Coalition in 2024, which gave our members access to a broader network of leading corporates, policymakers, and standard setters. You can think of it as like a network within a network. Beyond is independent and has its own governance, but our members benefit from that broader reach. And so, Beyond's founding company members are Amazon, Google, Netflix, Workday, Salesforce, Microsoft, as well as our NGO partners like Conservation International, Environmental Defense Fund, World Wildlife Fund, and UN Environment Program. And so now we've, over the past 18 months, grown our membership to include a wider array of corporate leaders, representing over $12.5 trillion in combined annual revenue. And that really does influence global value chains and climate finance decisions. So that's Beyond. But why our members join, and I'm sure this is similar across other coalitions, but what we've heard routinely is that they enjoy having access to experts and NGO partners that are really keeping them ahead of the curve. They also can contribute to one voice that is helping to influence the policies and standards that are shaping the market. They also can help leverage a platform for positive market narratives, which are always needed. And then just having access to a trusted peer network where they can have candid conversations about the challenges that they're facing. And so really building that community. But ultimately what Beyond is trying to achieve is making climate finance scale at flow. And so that basically from there, we can make sure every dollar is counting towards the solutions that we need to keep net zero within reach.
Thanks, Carl. Catherine, why don't you go next as a company in a few different coalitions and initiatives and talk about why and how and which ones?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm at Google, where I'm focused on advocacy for carbon removals. And we participate and have helped co-found a number of coalitions. And at the sort of headline view, I think the first thing that came to my mind when you asked this question, Janet, was, we are really committed to taking action on climate, but we will have failed if we are the only ones who are doing that. And so we are really excited and committed to collaborate in these coalitions with others, not only so that way we can take our own individual action, but that we can amplify and accelerate the work that we're doing by being in partnership with others to catalyze systems change. And so I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of other benefits to having that those candid peer conversations and getting access to experts like Carl mentioned, but I think it really can help take what we're doing and further accelerate and scale our impact.
And I really love that Beyond has NGO partners in there too, so you can hear from different voices and about what people are looking for. Clare, Kinetic is very different. It's not really about buying carbon credits today. Tell us about what that coalition is, if you would.
So we're part of the Advanced Market Commitment crew that is emerging over time to take on, I would characterize it as some like the thornier issues, the harder to abate kind of sectors or more complex in some way. So Kinetic emerged out of the question, why are electricity emissions why are we not seeing reductions in electricity emissions globally? So we're now at a place where we're seeing awesome build out of clean energy, year on year, clean energy build out increases across the globe. That's great. Why aren't we seeing a transition though from fossil fuels to clean energy? Why aren't we seeing electricity emissions decline? And if you look globally, you really aren't seeing emissions from the electricity sector decline. And in fact, they're the largest sector of emissions still. So that's the problem that we were working to tackle. And thinking about what wasn't on the table, what were the barriers, what were possible solutions, one thing we realized was that we really weren't using carbon markets to bring financing to bear in the way that we needed to. And so if you think about a major infrastructure project, a major energy project, there's a capital stack to it, if you will. There's, you have to bring all the financing together, and there's equity and debt. But for the energy transition, that just isn't enough for major emerging economies and developing countries to actually create those investments. So the thing that was missing was carbon finance. And carbon finance can provide that catalytic capital, like grant financing, that can then incite those transitions, allow for just transition, allow for you to have all the costs associated with closing down a coal plant and replacing it with clean energy, or investing in a grid infrastructure. So we came out of a thorny problem, and I think you've seen that from Frontier and Symbiosis and others who are like us creating these advanced market commitments that allow us to take on something that's hard and complex, that requires capital investment, requires pooling capital, requires a commitment to a developer or to a country that financing will be there. And that's why we've kind of pulled together a coalition of companies to be able to do that, because you can only really do that with numbers and with a group, because we're talking about a lot of scale. And so you need power in numbers.
How has your initiative changed over time? Because it has changed, right? From where you started to where you are today. Yes.
It's changed in a number of ways. One is just the approach. So, early on, there was a lot of focus on an energy sector-based approach, just looking at a whole energy sector and how do you work with a government in reducing emissions in your entire energy sector. And we're still working on that approach with the World Bank and others. And Windrock ERT is developing a methodology related to that energy sector-based approach. But we realize that there's a lot of different types of problems in the energy sector, and there's a lot of different barriers to energy transition, and every place is different. So, our pilot in the Dominican Republic, there the issue is grid investment. And the whole energy sector as a whole needs a ton of grid investment, along with energy storage and renewables. That's going to be best done through an energy sector approach. But then there's fast emerging economies in Asia where coal is the problem, and you're really not going to see a sector-based approach. Energy security is key. You must ensure that you've got energy security, especially with demand growth, AI growth. And there we've found what's really going to work, and what we need to do is have proof points around replacing coal plants with clean energy. And so we have a pilot in the Philippines that I can talk more about if you want, but there we're taking a kind of asset-based approach and replacing a coal plant with clean energy, proving that's possible, proving you can still have energy security. And then there's other places like Indonesia, where you've got a bunch of islands, and you might have a whole island that's running just on diesel generators. And so there the question isn't closing coal or a grid. There the question is, like, how can we replace all these diesel generators that cost a lot, that pollute a lot, with clean energy? The capital isn't there to do that. How can we bring in the capital, the catalytic capital to do that, replace all those diesel generators with clean energy? So it's evolved over time in terms of expanding into what is now, I like to think of as an emerging asset class of energy transition credits, through different methodologies. Different methodologies.
Developing one methodology is challenging. Develop multiple methodologies is even more challenging. So good luck. Catherine, why don't you talk about superpollutants for a minute? I don't know, I mean, there was a whole session on superpollutants this morning, but you're part of this superpollutant action initiative. And I know you're part of Beyond, and Beyond is helping to bring companies together for that. But maybe you could talk about why you guys are in that issue, why that's important to you.
Yeah, I would love to, and so excited to see all the superpollutant talk at this conference. Maybe before I jump in, just to ground us in some broader context, Carbon removals is only one small piece of the puzzle of all of the really cool, innovative stuff that Google has going on in the climate, energy, and sustainability space. So my job is really fun because every day I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another exciting new thing happening. Either we are unleashing innovative technology on energy, or we are designing and launching first-of-a-kind satellites to spot wildfires from space. And carbon removals is just one part of that piece of the puzzle, but it's a really, really important one because it's something that the planet really needs. And so we have to kind of think about carbon removals in that context. And on the carbon removals front, what our goal here is to do is really just to deliver the solutions that the planet needs the most, and also to help unblock barriers so that way other people can follow along and access them as well. So that's kind of like the grounding framework that we think about when we think about our portfolio and what we're trying to do. That's the goal. So before we get into the details of the super pollutants, maybe I'd like to share with you some of the principles that we use to inform the solutions that we decide to partner on. And those two principles really are rooted in two criteria. The first one is the certainty of impact, and the second one is the scale of impact. So in order for us to be able to support a project, we really have to genuinely be confident and believe that it can have an impact on the planet, a positive impact on the planet. And that is where the transparent verification and reporting and measurement comes in, and that trust that's really important the project will actually deliver. So that's on the certainty side. On the scale side, the solutions, we also have to believe we'll be able to make a dent at the billion-ton scale because that's the size of the problem right now. And so what that means is that we are really excited to invest in projects that have the potential to scale globally. And that means not only are they technically feasible, but also that they could become affordable for more people to be able to access. And so those are the two guiding principles that we use at Google when we're thinking through which solutions to partner on. So with that in mind, I'll get to super pollutants, I promise. We use these two criteria to guide the development of our diverse portfolio that we have. And that portfolio includes both near-term solutions, medium-term solutions, and long-term solutions across several different lines of effort. So the first line of effort I'm going to talk about is breakthrough technologies. So we are excited to back new technologies that take CO2 out of the atmosphere, and that is why in 2022 we helped co-found Frontier, which is a $1 billion advanced market commitment to make investments in some of these newer technologies alongside our corporate peers to help de-risk them and bring them along on their journeys. Besides these new technologies, though, there's another really cool technology that's been around for a really long time, right under our nose, which is photosynthesis. And so that brings us to nature-based credits. So at Google, we are excited about nature-based credits. We understand nature wasn't designed to be easy to measure, though. And so we are really committed to trying to develop new methodologies for rigorous measurement in that space. And that is why in 2024, we helped co-found the Symbiosis Coalition. And just a couple days ago, actually, we had an exciting announcement for a new offtake agreement to help restore degraded US agricultural lands, which as a farm kid, very excited to see that announcement come out. And so our nature-based work is really focused on trying and developing the science that's needed for really high quality, rigorous, high integrity nature-based credits. But those two lines of effort, the breakthrough technologies and the nature-based solutions, unfortunately, we sort of were scratching our head and we're like, I think there's something else we need to be worried about beyond CO2, which brings us to super pollutants. So they go by many different names, short-lived climate pollutants, and we've heard a lot about them already at this conference, which is great, but these gases punch above their weight in terms of warming. And the latest science reports have said they could be responsible for up to 50% of warming. So at Google, we believe that something that's 50% of warming should be more than 0% of our portfolio, which is why we were really thrilled to partner with Beyond and launch the Super Pollutant Action Initiative alongside 6 of our corporate peers to help support these projects that can tackle super pollutants. And at Google, we don't see it as an either or, we see it as a both and. And as we heard earlier today on the super pollutants are the new market darling panel, we need to take all the action we can, and this could be a really powerful short-term solution to tackle near-term warming. And we really want to set the precedent at Google. Any one of these solutions can be really powerful, but when you combine them, that's what they can have the greatest effect. And so what we're doing is building this portfolio and combining the near, medium, and long-term tools that we have in our toolkit, and then really transparently reporting on when we are investing in these shorter-term solutions, making sure that we're reporting on them and then replacing their impact when that impact expires with some of these longer-term solutions as a bridge to scale while they scale. And so we're really excited about the Super Pollutant Action Initiative. I'm sure Carl maybe would have some more comments about it, but we really are, supportive of all of these different types of technology, and we ground our support in those guiding principles of certainty and ability to scale. So
it's excellent that you're talking about a portfolio approach and the fact that we need to deal with near-term. We have near-term tipping points that are just beyond the horizon. I mean, they're very close. So dealing with near-term emission reductions, essential. I love long-term engineered, carbon removal. I love that. But we need to scale that. So super pollutants, I have a few friends who tell me that, if we don't deal with those, we're going to miss the opportunity. So short-term, nature, super pollutants, all good. Carl, why don't you talk about how you guys, I don't know whose idea this was, but it was a good idea. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the Super Pollutant Initiative.
Yeah, so Catherine covered it very well, as always. But yeah, just kind of highline numbers are that the Action Initiative is to contribute $100 million towards super pollutant mitigation up to 2030. And so the Beyond Alliance is working with our corporate partners as well as some other partners like the Carbon Containment Lab to produce a roadmap for corporates to understand what are the best levers to pull in doing super pollutant mitigation. We've also partnered with Calix to do a super pollutant academy to educate more of the market so they understand what super pollutants are, why they're important to mitigate, and what are the different pathways to do that, and in terms of diligence. And then we're also partnering with Efectera on Scope 3 refrigerant decarbonization, which is highly complex and technical, and I'm not going to dive into it now. There are much more qualified people to talk about that, but basically that's another arm of this where we're doing RFI and then an RFP to then hopefully educate buyers a little bit more about how to invest in this specific sector of super pollutants. So there's a lot of different moving pieces.
And could you tell us exactly, methane for sure, and 2O? I mean, what are the super pollutants that you're thinking about? Ozone depleting something, what is it?
Well, methane, black carbon, and refrigerants are the three big ones. But Catherine, I know there's a myriad more that she can add on to.
Yeah, and I always think that we almost need a cape that you can swirl on when someone says super pollutants.
Yeah, it's a great catch term. I love it. It's very good for marketing.
Yeah.
We used to call it short-lived climate forcers.
There you go. Yeah, it goes by many names.
I'm curious as to how you guys and others on this panel are thinking about integrity, because that's another reason why I feel like coalitions come together and companies come together. So one, we've talked about scale and impact. That's definitely the case with the companies we're working with, and from a buyer's lens, scale, impact, important. But I think integrity is also really important, and so we've seen, for example, our companies, we've made a commitment to have either ICBCM, CCP labeling for all of our methodologies, or PACM approval, or CORSIA. And companies are very interested in ICBCM. Countries that we talk with, a lot of them are also interested in ICBCM, CCP labeling. Singapore, for example, is looking at that for their whitelisting of their methodologies. They're also looking at PACM. So anyway, I'm interested in hearing what others think about integrity and how that plays with kind of from the buyer's lens and these coalitions.
It's not important at all, right? No, just kidding.
Yeah, a little bit. We're seeing more of our members really, align with high integrity frameworks like the CCPs and lock those in with forward offtake agreements more and more now, which as we see that each year, it does feel like the market's maturing a little bit more, a little more trust behind that. Also, this kind of parlays into something else that we would see as a big mover in the market is if there were safe harbor provisions where good faith investments that are aligned with integrity benchmarks, like the CCPs, would enable corporates to make claims related to those investments without fear of any potential reputational or otherwise, risk, because the fact that a company can do that in good faith, but another company that has an unsubstantiated claim can both face the same amount of risk seems a little backwards. So we're always trying to push for CCPs in a few different avenues, but we have seen a bigger trend toward that with our members. So
What's really getting me is companies that do nothing don't end up in the press, but companies that try end up in the press. I think that is totally backwards. Humble opinion here. Catherine, do you want to?
Well, actually, I was going to turn the question back to Claire because, as a buyer, we are constantly thinking about integrity and thinking a lot about this. But as a leader of a coalition, can you kind of talk us through how this plays out in one of your projects? Like, how do you ensure that you have those pieces in place for the high integrity, and also with all the different players that you're trying to organize, how do you think about it at this sort of project lens?
That's a great question. So maybe I'll use the example of our pilot project in the Philippines, because I think it's really interesting, and hopefully you will too. But basically, we've got two major pilot projects, one in the Dominican Republic, one in the Philippines. In the Philippines, we're working to actually replace a coal plant, 246 megawatt coal plant, with clean energy. And so a few years back, we realized there was no methodology around this. People were like, is this even possible? Most people said no, but here we are a few years later. There's a methodology, it's Vera approved, it's under ICVCM kind of review. And I think the way that we've thought about it and the way that they developed that methodology was learning from the past. And so looking at leakage, making sure that you're addressing leakage. So in this case, you have to make sure that when you close that coal plant, you're not actually just then pulling coal from a different coal plant. The Philippines has 26 coal plants on their grid. Are you pulling energy from a different, you have to make sure that the methodology is strong enough that you're not resulting in leakage. You also have to make sure that it's going to be permanent. So in this case, the methodology requires that you actually close and decommission that coal plant and deconstruct that coal plant and replace it with clean energy. So you can't, flip the switch and turn it back on when your demand goes up. And so we have worked really hard to identify a really good project developer. So that's another piece, is integrity around kind of the off-taker or the developer. The developer,
like
thank
us.
you.
No,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
The developer, and making
Not
sure
us.
that, not in this case, but that the developer is high integrity as well. So anyway, just thinking through all of these pieces, making sure the methodology is strong, making sure that the developer is strong, and then working with, in this case, high integrity companies and off-takers and high integrity countries that are really serious about emission reductions. So.
I understand you're also trying to take it through PACM, right? Article 6.4?
Yes, eventually. I think there's Rockefeller Foundation is working with others to try to work to push forward on a methodology, the same methodology, but put it through PACM approval. So I think that it will probably look a little bit different than the current Vera methodology. But I think this is an interesting piece, is that as PACM gets stood up, more and more countries in particular want their methodologies to be PACM approved. And that's what we're hearing from companies, and I think you'll see that maybe as the EU eventually starts to buy credits, and certainly with other Asian buyers.
And just to be clear, transition credits are reductions. They're not removals.
Yes.
And when you get to super pollutants, reductions, not removals. Have you thought about super pollutants in the frame of PACM? I actually know there's a bit of a challenge with that, but I think taking them to PACM and getting the UNFCCC behind it would be a great thing. I'm not sure they realize that there is a challenge. Have you guys, I'm happy to tell you what the challenge is, but maybe you already know.
Well, wasn't the first approved methodology landfill methane for Article 6.4, or?
But not like refrigerants?
Oh, sure.
Not all, right?
No, but I just mean it seems like we've gotten in now.
We got one.
Yeah, we got one.
But remember that like the UNFCCC and Paris are the Kyoto gases, the 6 Kyoto gases. If you're not a Kyoto gas, you're not eligible. So some of the super pollutants are not Kyoto gases. So I think that's a real gap. And I'm not sure how one fixes that unless we have people talking to them about the importance of eliminating these short-term climate pollutants that really can make a difference. So anyway, I think PACM has a lot of ability to scale. It becomes a global standard for some. And I was really happy to hear that you guys are trying to go through the PACM process. Not easy. None of this is super easy, but it's worthwhile. We have to do it.
But it's high impact.
It's high impact, exactly.
And I would say that's why we really appreciate spaces like this, so we can come together across buyers and developers and policymakers and share. At Google, what we are committed to doing is taking action on climate and also transparently sharing about our approach and our learnings. And so, that is, I think, a good starting point for helping to sort of identify where some of these challenge areas may be.
Yeah, and being able to talk about the challenges enables you to actually work through solutions. If you don't know what the challenges are or the barriers are, you can't actually get there. So I think that's pretty exciting. I love the catalytic change and the catalytic, that's the best thing about offsets, is because what change this value on carbon can motivate, what innovation it can motivate. That's the most fun part about carbon credits in my mind, is that extra value can move a lot of things. So tell me a little bit about how you are coordinating, because I listed off a bunch of things, and you listed off, between Symbiosis, and I didn't even mention the LEAF Coalition. I forgot about those guys. There's a lot of coalitions. Are you talking together? What are you doing?
Yeah, we're like talking daily to each other because it's hard, and we're like building these coalitions, and there's, we're trying to figure out what's our governance model, what's our financing model. We're a nonprofit based out of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and so foundation money can take us a certain length of the way, but do we need membership fees? Do we need, what is the actual long-term structure for these coalitions? And then also, I think just conveying what an advanced market commitment is, what it means to pool companies together. So we started with a happy hour at New York Climate Week. Last year was our first event together, and then we did an event together in Davos, and then we're going to do another one together in London at London Climate Week. So I feel like it's going to be the AMC Roadshow. So
and you are talking to Carl, right?
Yeah, we're talking to Carl.
Okay.
So we've got this like little roadshow going, I feel like. But the whole point is that we aren't in competition. We need all of these solutions on the table. We need to have massive climate action. We need to scale that climate action. And so I feel like we've come together in this really beautiful way, not seeing each other as competition, knowing that there are enough countries, enough companies, enough buyers out there that we all need to be pushing forward together.
Yeah.
Are you competing for members?
I don't believe so, because many of our members are also members of Kinetic, Frontier, Symbiosis. And I actually find it really encouraging that our members are doing this, because they're very serious about the problem if they're going to dedicate time and resources across these different coalitions, because it really does require to tackle the problem from various angles. And that collaboration among the coalitions is not conceptual. Last year we launched our common app for ARR, which was a project due diligence tool in partnership with Symbiosis based on their reforestation RFP. And we released that so that any company could do due diligence on a nature-based project. And I think the key lesson here is that corporates aren't just focused on buying credits. They want to build a market that they can trust. And no single coalition can do that on their own. It requires all of us approaching with these different models. And I think, as evidenced on this stage, we are stronger together. So it gives me a lot of hope.
Catherine, you are a part, this takes a lot of your time, I'm sure, because you have meetings, you have to be, if you're not going to the meetings and you're not listening in on the conversation, what's the point? So this takes a lot of your time. This isn't your sole job, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I'm also the mom of a 4-year-old, which takes a lot of my time. No, but it's prior to Google, I was at McKinsey seconded to the World Economic Forum, and we did a lot of work there thinking through the power of public, private, and philanthropic partnerships. And one thing that I was just reflecting on when you asked that question, Janet, was the role of the private sector in those partnerships, where we can be the most powerful, is by just putting money into the market.
Oh yeah.
And it's so important that we have these collaborations and coalitions to help us do that, and both that we can use to advocate, to kind of lift the whole market up, and that also can provide feedback to us as buyers, to learn from other buyers and to create that space for that conversation. And so it is totally a joy and a privilege that is part of my job that we get to be part of these groups, and it's super helpful for the work that we do in unlocking progress.
I have a question for Carl, maybe, because you guys have so many different buyers, and for us and like Frontier and Symbiosis and Kinetic, we've got these awesome companies like Google that are like ready to be first movers. They want scale, they want impact, and they have the resources and the teams. They're still stretched thin, but they have the resources and the teams to put time into developing these initiatives with us, and it's very much a co-creation, and that's awesome. But as we think about scale, like our project in the Philippines is like 19 million tons of greenhouse gas reductions from 10 years of reductions from closing that coal plant 10 years early. So it's like 19 million tons, it's a lot. And we want to do that, there's 2,000 to 9,000, depending on how you count them, coal plants in Asia. Like we want to do that with a lot of coal plants in Asia. So that's a lot of tons reduced, and it's really high impact. So we're thinking about that next scale of like, okay, how do we move beyond this amazing core group of companies to like a much broader group of companies? And what we've heard is that from a lot of these other companies is that like we don't have the time and the size of the teams to be dedicated to this work. You come to us when you've got a project, you've got a price, you've done the due diligence, and then we will sign on. So that's kind of what we're hearing from the second round of companies. And as we look into Asian companies and things like that, is that what you're hearing? Or like, how do you think about the group, the buyers in your?
Can I also add it? How do you get more? Are you advertising? No.
Yeah, let me put on my sales hat. No, I'll frame it in like the Super Pollutant Action Initiative, right? Like, there's the same concern. People are like, whoa, what is this other new thing that we should be paying attention to that we've been having a blind eye to this whole time? And it's very complicated. That's why, Beyond partnered with different experts to tackle this from different areas and give very, precise information at the right time and help educate the market over this next year to then get them ready to diligence and vet and source projects together and arrive at consensus point, but only once they feel comfortable. So that's why I was saying, like, we've partnered with Calyx on a Super Pollutant Academy, because there's really just a basic education piece. But then Carbon Containment Lab is very focused on the roadmap of like developing how we actually get to that goal of 2030 and 100 million being invested and even more, hopefully. And so it just, I don't have a perfect answer for you other than that it does take time to get all these buyers engaged and understanding those dynamics. So yeah, that's all I can really offer.
Are you out there looking? Are you welcoming new members? I mean, how are you getting folks to join you?
Yeah.
You send Catherine out. She's a good ambassador.
Yeah, Catherine, get out there. No. Oh, sorry.
It's pretty fun.
No, we're not actively recruiting, funny as it may seem. No, I mean, members do come to us. We host events at different, climate, just like this, where, at Trellis we'll have different buyers boot camps to really, again, what we're talking about here sometimes can be very technical, and trying to get new buyers interested in the market requires to just go back to the basics and the foundations of the market and why they should be investing here, and why these coalitions are helpful in driving that impact. So we do have different activation events. That is, I guess, one way that we recruit, but it's not a strong pitch.
Carl, you may not be recruiting, but we are. So if you're a buyer and you're interested in real high impact in the energy sector, let us know.
That's great. Carl, as a follow-up on that, on the super pollutants piece, can you help us, like for the Super Pollutant Academy, could you maybe speak a little more if there's folks who are excited to learn more about super pollutants, how they could dig into that?
Yes, so unfortunately the first cohort is full, but if you go on our website, there's a super pollutant page specifically, and you can sign up for a newsletter and you can be notified when the next cohort opens, but it was oversubscribed, which is great.
That's awesome.
That's a telling feature.
Yeah, exactly, a lot of demand, and as we've seen by different topics here at NACW, but yeah, so unfortunately, nothing right now. But yeah, you can sign up and to be notified for the next cohort, because it's trying to break down super pollutants, I think meeting bi-weekly to try and just really go piece by piece until you have a more sophisticated understanding of that specific market.
And you said it's on your website. Beyond Or we mean business?
Beyond Alliance, yeah. So again, to remind, we mean business is its own separate thing.
Right.
We are independent and have our own governance. We're just housed within them.
Okay.
But yeah.
Just to make sure everybody knows where they can go and look.
Yeah, beyondalliance.org. Yep.
Okay. I think recruiting is always good, but difficult. But I think it's, and sometimes you want to have fully committed. Mm-hmm. And if you're fully committed, then you probably know a little bit more, so it makes it a little easier. But getting that first group, can be a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we were very lucky, actually, I feel like, with the first group. There was like a really good cohort of companies that stepped forward and said, like, this is like a really important challenge, and we want to take it on. And so I think that's been really great. And then for us, for me, the recruiting, as now I look, beyond our initial pilots and think about really scaling this, like that's where I'm looking to that next step. And so some of the things that we're thinking about are Corsia. We are also actively working with governments. It's really exciting to see governments start to do Article 6 transactions. And then we're also looking at companies in Asia, companies in the Middle East, Latin American companies that I don't think we've done as good of a job to date in kind of building that network out and reaching out to those companies. And I would say one interesting thing that's come together with our Philippines pilot in particular is the power of having companies and countries come together in the same deal. And so we're likely, that's going to be, about half of the offtake is probably going to be from a couple of countries that are buying under 6.2. And then, a good portion of that will be from the voluntary carbon market and companies working to meet their net zero targets. And so those, I think, what we've heard from the companies involved and the countries involved is that those actually give each other a lot of confidence, and that both parties are really excited about the others being involved because it gives them confidence, there's power in numbers, and it's just like an even better story.
That takes me to I'm a policy person. And I always think, well, what is it that will get companies going? Well, if we had a national carbon price, which we don't, but we do have in California, but what kind of policies? Maybe safe harbor, you mentioned that. Governments coming to, that's not really a policy, but it is an initiative. I mean, it's a driver. Mm-hmm. What would be key drivers? And Catherine, feel free to weigh in from your perspective as, from the corporate community. What do you think would motivate other companies to join these kind of coalitions?
Well, I do think that, a lot of these companies, it's not a willingness issue, it's a confidence issue, right? Where there's confidence about, is what I'm buying high quality, confidence about whether will the rules change and underneath me and upend my net zero targets or long-term contracts, or again, confidence around even if I follow the rules and use high integrity credits and make credible claims, that I could be at risk of something reputationally or legally. And so, yeah, fortunately there are solutions to all these, and we're starting to see a positive direction of travel across standards and policies on that front. For safe harbors, we're starting to see those introduced. It's not just a US issue though. Globally, regulators and standard setters are grappling with, like, how do we keep corporates accountable for climate-related claims while still encouraging investment? And so that's something that Beyond is really focused on, trying to find that right balance and advocating for, because it would send an enormous signal to corporate legal and sustainability teams that could unlock potentially billions from the sidelines. So safe harbor provisions are a big one. And I do think that, like we spoke to earlier, aligning with integrity frameworks as part of that, but also because that way companies don't have to navigate 10 different frameworks when they're trying to make investments in the market or talk about their investments, is a critical one. And we are seeing more standards and policies either integrate or explicitly reference integrity frameworks such as the CCPs. It's getting better. But yeah, if anyone else wants to comment on it.
Any other major drivers you think?
I mean, we have to get into a long standards conversation, but obviously companies want to be able to take credit for the actions that they're taking. And so I think things like, there's the AIM platform that are looking at associated emissions in scope 3 and how to account for those. And there's kind of other initiatives underway, and obviously GHGP and SBTI are, but standards are a really important piece of this, obviously. And companies being able to say, like, yes, I can claim this credit towards my target is a really key piece of it.
Thank you.
I'm just going to say it.
Using credits towards goals as opposed to,
Yes.
I mean, I'm all for donating them to the global environment, but it's hard to make a business case for altruism. I mean, a little bit of altruism, but the business case is being able to use it for your goals. Sometimes that's lost on people. So I appreciate you saying that. Catherine, do you have any thoughts on how we get more companies to join these kind of initiatives or take more action?
Yeah, I think a lot of the points that I've heard over the last day, I've heard a lot about carbon is hard, it requires education, and even just getting into a conversation about the standards and the policies, it's complicated, and I'm not the expert on accounting for Google for removals, and so I think that one of the biggest barriers is just folks having a clear understanding and of, in a line of sight to sort of how will this work and what the implications are for companies on the regulatory side is really important. I think another thing that's really important is, I already said this, but forums like these where you can look at the voluntary markets and understand what the lessons are that have been learned there and sort of have that dialogue and conversation so that as Google, we can just say, here's what we're doing, we're gonna share openly about it. And we really, our commitment is to be transparent and to take action and to, feel free to use us as an example to help kind of clarify how this could work in practice. So I think those conversations are really important. And then also, I think the last thing is these coalitions. They're great. Mm-hmm. It's a way that you can help pool demand, and it's also a way, every company has its different context and set of constraints. And so these coalitions can be a really great way for buyers to be able to participate without necessarily sort of having to go it alone without the resources and expertise that a coalition can bring.
I think you made a good point about learning too, about sharing learnings, what's worked, what hasn't worked. To me, there's huge advantage to working together towards something. But having that as a goal, so you go into an advanced market commitment, you go into a buyer's pool, how do you divide the credits? Is it based on how much you put in the
Yeah, for us, it's how much you buy.
Okay.
So it's pretty straightforward. It's like, okay, we've got 19 million tons from this one coal plant closure. Again, like significant. I think everybody should wrap their minds around how much we have to reduce in the energy sector. Yeah. And so it's really great and high impact. And if you're a company, the cool thing about it is that by being involved, you're helping that whole project happen. You obviously can't take credit for that whole project though. So if you're buying 30,000 tons of that, 19 million, and it's 19 million over 10 years, so you're buying 30,000 tons a year, then you get to claim those 30,000 tons. But you can tell the story then, and we haven't talked much about storytelling, you can tell the story that actually, but my 30,000 tons have helped create 19 million tons of reductions. And also, helped the local community there that's been suffering from this coal plant for years and years and years. And they've got high local water and air pollution, and now that's gone. And they can actually, there's a just transition. And so there's new clean energy jobs, there's training for new jobs. So there's also just this really important community story to tell as well. But in terms of the actual credits, you only get credit for what you're buying. But you can tell the story about the larger scale impact, which is really important.
Yeah, I could see where that, I mean, with nature-based credits, for example, mm-hmm. there's all the extra benefits, the watershed protection, mm-hmm. the biodiversity that you could mm-hmm. to tell as part of the story. And I think that's one of the reasons why nature-based credits have been so popular in the last few years. You don't have that so much with superpollutants, but you do have the short-term impact narrative mm-hmm. that I think is an easy story to tell, especially using the words super pollutant. It just sounds so much better. but I'm just curious, when you think about recruiting companies, I know you're not doing a lot of that, but what are you selling them? I mean, why are you telling them to come into Beyond?
Yeah, because our members aren't just interested in buying credits, they're actually focused on like the policies and standards and market infrastructure. And so it does become more of a narrative around like, if we don't pull together our collective influence on this, there are jurisdictions or standards that could exclude nature when we need it most to avoid near-term tipping points. So bringing in that collective voice, we can help influence those kind of decisions. And again, not around like the anonymity or anything like that, but just the joint effort of this coalition to influence that. So that's a big benefit to it. Speaking to earlier what Catherine said, that carbon markets in general are just dense. And so using a coalition to, whether it's the different workshops or webinars or other events that we have to help demystify some of these different aspects and get ahead of what's shaping the market is a big value add for those members. I would love to shamelessly plug also what you've been doing, Janet, if you
Oh, you
feel,
can plug it.
Okay. But at BACA, what you guys provide in terms of, well, if you might want to talk about a little.
Go ahead, and then I'll pile on and give my own.
But we're members of,
commercial.
Beyond is also a member of BACA because there's just so much to cover across all these different policy landscapes. And we do need to coordinate responses and make sure there's a strong, coherent response on nature or whatever it might be. And BACA has been really helpful in focusing on specific policies and policymakers. So.
Oh, thanks. And I mean, we formed BACA to help educate people. I mean, we get a lot of value from AIDA in terms of, what's going on in the world, but we also felt we needed to be in those offices and be talking about what are the key issues. For example, in Europe, if you do a nature-based project under the carbon removal, carbon farming initiative, you're automatically temporary. But you can't have a credit in the EU ETS, the emissions trading system, if you're temporary. So that's a problem. You can't have nature as a nature-based credit into the EU program. Well, if you talk about how you can make your nature-based credits effectively permanent by buffer pools, by insurance, and in the longer term, potentially by the permanence trust that the American Forest Foundation is actually trying to establish. So I think there's, that's an agenda that we can get it behind to push nature. In the same vein, I think the same is true for super pollutants at the UNFCCC. It is just a gap that they hadn't thought of before. So, I've had a few conversations and I'd like to have a few more. And I think that understanding how, yep, methane, but not all, because they're not all Kyoto gases. I never thought of that as a big issue until investigating it. And why can't these be PACM credits? Well, they can't. Mm-hmm. Some methane can, but not the others. But that's part of it, is figuring out what the problems are so that you can get in there and offer solutions. Mm-hmm. And for transition credits, the EU is talking about, hey, we want international credits that are transformative. You get an in, mm-hmm. but you're going to have them be PACM.
Yes. I think we're really excited about the fact that the EU has now said, for their 2040 target, they're open to 5% of international credits. We definitely see that as a big opportunity. And I do think that energy transition credits are unique in that they are really high impact. And then they also can kind of function almost as overseas development assistance. I think governments kind of see them, when you see, I haven't talked about our Dominican Republic pilot, but in the Dominican Republic, we're looking at a whole energy sector approach. So there, the problem isn't coal so much as they just have a really old grid. And so they already have a little bit of renewables, but they actually they're constantly curtailing their renewables. And so there the need is massive grid investment alongside new renewables, alongside energy storage. And so we're working with the government, we're also working with the World Bank, and again, Winrock ERT is developing the methodology. And there, again, it's looking at that whole sector, and it's a massive investment. Like, the reason why it hasn't happened is because it's a really big cost to modernize your grid. It's gonna be, over a $300 million investment. And so you really need a bunch of different parties coming together. And it's more in the form of, I think, what most governments think of as traditional overseas development assistance, climate finance, to have Singapore or the EU or Germany or France work together with the Dominican Republic to say, okay, we're going to help you accelerate this transition and really move towards an energy grid that's modern, that's clean, that's affordable, and is, reliable.
That takes a lot of money.
Yes.
And carbon credits aren't selling for that high. So what can we do about that? I mean, are you envisioning that carbon revenue will fund all of this?
No, so it's really about catalytic finance.
Okay.
Because everybody knows the cost of renewables has come down, and to build a new renewable project, you arguably don't need a lot of any subsidy. The return on investment is there. What the return on investment isn't there necessarily for is that full transition and pulling in all of this, major investments like this. So how I think about it, and I mentioned this a little bit, is like in that capital stack, you need equity, you need debt. There's a lot of debt out there. You can have the World Bank and others coming in for that debt. That equity is really hard. And what carbon finance does is it comes in like grant financing. That's how I think of it. It's like, comes in as like basically grant financing that can then buy down the cost of the project and leverage all of that to bring on more debt and make that capital stack pencil out.
This conference, you have buyers. You also have carbon credit developers, and you have, I would call it, related industries, like, GIS, verification and monitoring companies. And there are opportunities for all of those companies in these different areas, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, we look at the ecosystem and like, this is, even while it's innovative, it still requires all the different pieces of the carbon market and, third-party verifiers and registries and all of the different pieces that are part of the regular carbon market that has been set up. And so any one of these projects is a huge opportunity for the whole ecosystem. And then again, I think our goal is to really scale this. That's where you get impact. And so I do think that like once we're able to prove out our pilot projects in the Dominican Republic and the Philippines, you're going to see a lot of other interests coming in to do projects like these, and it's a lot more work for all of us. Catalytic
investment, catalytic effort to motivate others, coalitions that bring people together to provide that kind of, these buyers clubs and these buyers initiatives, I think, are a powerful force. There's so many reasons that companies join these coalitions and do these initiatives, and that's the goal of this conversation. You've heard that quality is important, you've heard that knowledge is important, that time is super valuable, but everybody's got a different reason. And at the end of the day, what we care about, though, is actually action on climate change. So if we can get more people engaged in the carbon market, where a credit proves that your money made a difference, then I think that's a clear win.
Yeah, it's a real world impact.
It really is.
That's what we're looking for. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank our speakers. I hope you've enjoyed this session. It's been a little bit different than I think other sessions where we're talking more about what buyers are looking for and how they want to be involved. So please join with me in thanking our speakers. I know I enjoyed this conversation.